All right. Good morning and welcome to Tips to Reduce Parent Stress and Anxiety. We are really excited to have Rachel Bailey here with us today. And without any further ado, I will turn it to her.
Thanks, Nadia. And thanks those of you who can be here to learn some tips and really what I hope to be practical strategies for reducing stress and anxiety. And I'm going to tell you that there's a little bit of good news and bad news about the tips that I'm going to share. The good news is that they're actually pretty simple things you can do to noticeably reduce your stress and anxiety. The bad news is that you're going to think these are so simple they won't work. And trust me, I'm going to walk through them with you a little bit today so that you'll see, again, you will noticeably see a difference in your stress and anxiety when you use these strategies today. So I'm excited to teach them to you. I'm about to share my screen, but I will tell you that I tend to be pretty interactive in my presentations. So I'm going to be asking you questions. They're mostly yes, no questions, simple things. You don't have to do a lot of thinking, but I would love it if you would interact in the chat with me. It just makes it a little bit more engaging than me just speaking at you the whole time. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and give you a little bit of a background about me as well. But again, we're going to be addressing parent stress and anxiety with really specific tips for you today. So I'm about to introduce myself, but if you don't mind, we're going to start with the interactive element, just putting in the chat the ages of your children. Those of you who are here live, how old are your children? I'll go ahead and introduce myself, but I would love to hear about you. So as I'm waiting to see, okay, so they're already showing up 9. Wonderful. So I'll just give it a minute to see who's here, and then otherwise I'll get started. 5 and 7. Excellent. 16. Okay. 6. You can keep typing. I'm just going to talk and I'm glancing to the ages as I'm talking. So don't think I'm not seeing what you're writing. But go ahead and keep putting it in the chat if you are able to. So I am a mom of 2. My kids are 13 and 15 years old. They're in 7th and 10th grades. In addition to being a mom, I have a master's degree in clinical psychology. And thank you for continuing to post. I love to see that. So we have some pretty young ones all the way through teenagers. So by the way, this is going to be relevant for you, however old your children are today. But just to continue, I have a master's degree in clinical psychology, a certification, and actually a number of different things. This is kind of an older slide, but positive discipline is one. I also have certifications in helping parents of children with anxiety. So lots of different tips and strategies I've learned that I'm going to share with you as well. And in addition to having the background and the education, I also have experience as an ADHD coach. So I've been in the field of psychology for probably for about over 20 years now. I started off actually as an ADHD and academic coach. So I was working at the time with kids and teens who were struggling with school or sort of managing their materials, or there was a lot of sort of executive functioning issues going on. I was also what's called an in-home mentor. So I've gone into people's homes to help with the family dynamics. And I was a psychotherapist mostly for adolescents, but I did see some kids and quite a few adults as well. But I do not work with kids and teens anymore. I actually switched about 15 years ago now. I started working with parents instead of kids and teens, even though I'd been doing that for that point for probably 10 years, because I really realized working with parents, I could have a bigger impact on the entire family. So now I work with parents specifically, and I'm an expert if there is such a thing. I just have a lot of knowledge at motivating better behavior and performance and improving relationships, especially in the home. Although I do some speaking about improving relationships in the workplace as well. And I have a private practice where I specialize in working with parents of kids with big emotions. That's not actually my word. That comes from a lot of parents using those words. So kids who are anxious or sensitive or maybe displaying some sort of strong-willed behavior. That's really who I help these days. So I support parents by workshops, trainings. I have a podcast. I do workshops like this all the time. And then my private practice is where I really help parents with the strategy and the implementation. A lot of people will say, well, that all sounds great. I heard you speak at my work or at my school, but I really want to make this happen in my home. And that's what I do in my private practice. Really, my goal for parents is to feel confident in their ability to raise children who are resilient, who have really good, healthy self-esteem, and who are meeting their full potential. And that can be really hard when you have a child who's anxious or sensitive, strong-willed, or maybe has some executive functioning issues. So that is enough about me. I want to ask, if we talk about it we're talking about stress and anxiety in parents. What causes stress and anxiety? If you're comfortable putting that in the chat, you can always send me a private message. But what is it that causes your parenting stress and anxiety these days? If we could just kind of put it in context, because I can even talk a little bit more specifically about some of the things that come up if you're willing to put that in the chat. So, what causes your parenting stress and anxiety right now? Yeah, worries. And I would love to hear worries about what, if you're comfortable. Again, I don't want to push anybody. I've been talking to parents for a long time. I can use other parents. But what is it that you're worried about? The future. Okay. Anybody else? What's causing stress and anxiety? And I'll just start to say mostly it's about maybe kids not interacting with peers well, kids struggling in school, kids not seeming to like themselves, kids not taking responsibility for their behavior, social media influencers. Yep. Kids who are not able to, handle it, disappointment and frustration. Those are really common things that we worry about. Lack of executive functioning and disorganization. I'm going to talk about those, a couple of those today. So if you notice your child is always forgetting homework, or they're, doing their assignment, but then they forget to turn it in, or maybe they lose things a lot. That's very worrisome, because how are they going to be able to get good grades and meet their potential if they don't remember their homework? So let's see. Lack of executive functioning, emotional regulation. That's something that I really specialize in. I specialize in executive functioning and emotional regulation. Yeah. Kids who struggle with emotional regulation can't handle disappointment, frustration, even things changing a little bit. Like maybe you have to stop on the way home from, when you pick them up, you have to stop at the store, but they didn't know you had to stop at the store. So they have these big reactions. That can be very worrisome. How are they going to be able to handle life? Future without family for my child with profound autism. Absolutely, that makes sense. How is your child going to be able to manage without family? Struggling in school, keeping up with assignments. Son doesn't talk about his day much, so worried as he gets older he won't know when he's being picked on, etc. So children struggling with peer relationships and maybe not having strong relationships, or maybe holding feelings inside and those feelings get worse. Absolutely. Kids not liking their extracurricular activities. Sorry, I went down too far. Getting kids getting enough sleep. That's another big one, because that's like a biological need we know they have. And by the way, they're really irritable when they're not getting enough sleep. Too much work, divorce, family conflict, new baby, new home, difficulty making friends, screen time. So a lot of big stressors, changes in life with work and divorce and family conflict, new baby, new home. Those are a lot of changes, but also social situations, screen time. Are they okay with the amount of screens that they have? Is it affecting them? Son's special needs tend to interrupt while having conversations. So there's a sort of a social skills component. So there's a lot to worry about, very honestly. And we really want to recognize that these things are real. I'm not going to say, hey, don't worry about it. That's the last thing I would say. They are real. And I want you to know this. Actually, I'm going to ask you one question just to think about. You don't have to put it in the chat, but I want you to think about this. I want you to consider this. Why do two people react differently to the same situation? For example, let's say you have a child who has executive functioning issues. So they're forgetting their homework, and they're, not turning in assignments. They're messy. They can't find things. They're losing things. One parent could be, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. And another parent could be, it's okay. We'll handle this. We know there are resources out there. Two people can react differently to the same situation. And that leads to me explaining what actually causes stress and anxiety. Because it's not what we're facing that causes stress, it is how we think about and interpret what we are facing that's causing stress. And I don't want to imply that the things that we're facing aren't hard. But what's interesting is the way we think about hard determines whether we're going to have stress or anxiety. Specifically, when we feel stress or anxiety, and the difference between stress or anxiety, just as I'm talking about it today, by the way, is stress is more acute. It's like a situation that is sort of over our capacity to handle it. Anxiety is more ongoing, a belief. And this is really what I'm going to get into. These beliefs that bad things will happen, number one, and that we can't handle it. This is what's causing stress and anxiety. And the example I always give for this is many of us have heard of John Glenn. He was the first human to orbit the Earth. And what's interesting is I don't think there can be a scarier situation than orbiting the Earth, not knowing if you're about to, explode at any moment or what's going to happen or what alarm is going to go off. But what's really interesting, what they found about John Glenn is that when he was orbiting the Earth, his heart rate never went above that of an average man walking on Earth. He was not anxious. So, a really stress inducing situation does not have to cause anxiety. What causes anxiety is this belief we have that bad things will happen and we can't handle it. So, just a quick yes no question. How many say yes if you have heard this sort of concept that our thoughts affect our stress and anxiety? I'm just curious if you've heard this before. If you've done any self, but say yes if you have, no if you haven't, because a lot of self development will talk about this. So you probably, I'm assuming that many people have heard this already. When I first heard this was like probably 30 years ago, even before I was in school for psychology. Yes, but I haven't figured out how to control thoughts. And that's a really good point. You're not going to control your thoughts. You are going to actually let them happen. You're going to see what you're going to do. And that's probably why you've struggled. We can't control necessarily our thoughts, but what do we do with those thoughts is what I'm going to teach you about today. Okay, so there's a lot of awareness of this concept, and I'm going to give you some really, really practical strategies to know how to deal with thoughts that might be happening. Some of us can actually, and I teach a strategy that I'm not mentioning today about how we can make it less likely that those thoughts will happen, but that's not, I'm assuming you're going to have those thoughts today. Okay, so I see there's a question in there, and I will say that I'm going to answer questions at the end. So make sure you copy and paste, and only because if I get derailed, I'll never finish. Make sure if I don't answer your question that you ask me at the end. We have plenty of time built in for questions today. Okay, so we have this belief that we can't handle it. For example, my daughter isn't paying attention at school, so she'll get bad grades and it will affect her future. In fact, that's what the first person wrote when I said, "What are you worried about?" They wrote the future. That is the definition of anxiety. It's this belief that something bad will happen and I can't handle it. Interestingly, if you believe something bad will happen and I can handle it, you don't feel stressed, you don't feel as anxious. If you don't believe something bad will happen, you'll see this, you won't feel anxious. But if you believe something bad, but I know what to do, your anxiety will decrease. Another example, my son is so bossy, no one will like him and he'll be lonely for the rest of his life. It's another example. All right. So what I want you to do right now, it's another yes or no question. This might take you a minute to think about this, is think of something that is stressing you out right now. And then, so it could be anything. It doesn't have to be parenting related. You don't have to write in the chat what it is. But what I do want you to answer in the chat is this question. It's a yes or no question. The thing that's stressing you out, could something bad happen if this comes true? Just yes or no. Could something bad happen if this comes true? And for the person, I saw someone say no. I just want you to think, do you believe, then my next question would be, do you believe you have the capacity to handle it? Because what I will say is if you believe you have the capacity to handle it, your stress is probably going to go down, especially if you have a plan to handle it. And by the way, I'm not like trying to convince anybody. If you're still saying no, we could talk about that too. But so you're seeing the yeses coming in because by definition, we will become stressed or anxious. Our stress comes from a belief we don't have the capacity to handle a certain situation. Anxiety is more of an ongoing, life is going to be hard. I don't know what I'm going to do. I won't be able to handle it. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into what to do about this, but I just want you to see that this is the core of what really does cause stress and anxiety. And this is why stress and anxiety comes from our thoughts. So basically what's going on in the brain, there's a really primitive picture of the brain right here. I don't use AI for this clearly. It's an old picture I have from many, many years ago. Just to explain how the brain works. The front part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, many of you have probably heard of this part of the brain, allows us to manage our stress and our anxiety because this is where our rational thought lies, this prefrontal cortex, and our ability to solve problems. So, for example, if your child is struggling with executive functioning skills, or if they're really anxious or become dysregulated easily, this is the part of the brain that says, oh, okay, well, I'll find an expert who can help me with this. Your anxiety and stress is going to start to go down. This allows us to think things through. Well, just because this happens, it doesn't mean there's a catastrophe in my future. Just because my child struggles with executive functioning. In fact, I have a family member who has ADHD, who is now a CEO of a company. So there's no clear, they have ADHD, they're going to, and I grew up with this person. They had really poor executive functioning skills. They're now a CEO of a company. So not objectively, having poor executive functioning skills does not mean you're not going to be successful. And when we believe that, our anxiety is going to decrease. To see the big picture that, yeah, they may have trouble with regulation or with any of these skills. And really, that doesn't define them. That's not who they are. Maybe your child has really good social skills and that's how they get by. It allows us to reduce stress. But here's what happens is when we have these thoughts of some sort of threat, the way human brains are wired is when we sense a threat, our fight or flight kicks in. And one of the first things our fight or flight response does is it shuts off access to any part of the brain or body it feels is unnecessary for survival. So it shuts off access to the part of the brain that can think rationally, that can solve problems, that can think things through. What happens is when we are in fight or flight, we are not rational. We don't want to hear rational. In fact, I want you to think about this. Another yes, no question. When someone tells you when you're stressed or anxious, when someone says calm down and they explain why you just need to calm down, does that help? Say yes if it helps, no if it does not. When they try to explain rationally why you should not be upset, they just say calm down. Does it help? So let's say you're worried about your child not having friends and they say calm down, your child will be fine. It does not help. And that's partly because when you are in that part of your brain, there's literally a survival mechanism. Our survival mechanism is our fight or flight response is very, very strong. If you think about it, it's our ancestors that had a strong fight or flight response that kept them alive, that allowed them to reproduce. And that's why we're here. So it's very strong. It's programmed to override logic. When we really think there's danger, it's programmed to override logic. We're also, when we're in fight or flight, we are not open to new perspectives. In fact, we look for all the evidence that we are right. So if you have a child with poor regulation skills or poor executive functioning skills, and someone says they'll be fine, even if you just heard me say, hey, there's someone in my family with poor executive functioning skills growing up who's now a CEO, what your anxious brain might be thinking is, yeah, but my child, and you may come up with all the reasons they could never do that. They don't have great social skills. They don't, and your brain is good. We're really, really good at doing that. Not only that, but it prevents us when we're in this state from meeting our full potential when we're anxious. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you have a child with anxiety, they think they're not going to do well on a test. They're worried on the test. They stay stuck and they don't do as well on the test. And then they say, see, I can't take tests. This is why our thoughts play such a role in our ability to regulate ourselves. All right. So I have another question. If you are trying to calm, you can even think about your child. If you're trying to calm your child down or yourself, what do you think does not work? What have you found does not work? We already talked about logic not working. What else doesn't work? And if it's too hard to think about yourself, think about your child. What does not work when you try to calm them down? Telling them to calm down. Exactly. But that's what we do. I mean, let's be honest, because we don't have that many tools in our arsenal. So we say calm down. And there's this there's this quote that I love, I heard many years ago, is never in the history of humans being able to calm down has saying calm down ever calmed anyone down. It doesn't work, but that's what we say. Talking and not giving space. Yep. So talking a lot. And that's actually because when we're in fight or flight, the language part of our brain is also not as accessible. So we can't process language as easily when we're in that space. If anything, we kind of feel the intensity of the someone talking at us, and we just feel their intensity. We can't process what they're saying, and we get more anxious. Trying to be logical, shouting at them. Yeah. And I give a lot of talks on how to respond to anxious children. And these are all the things that we do that do not work. And they don't work on ourselves either. Beating ourselves up doesn't work to help us get out of stress or anxiety. Trying to be logical and just saying, oh, I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't have these thoughts. That does not reduce anxiety. I will tell you what does reduce anxiety. What does work first is evidence. We cannot be told that we will be fine. Unfortunately, our fight or flight response does not usually respond well to someone just telling, hey, you'll be fine. These are all the reasons you'll be fine. We need evidence, and we need a specific type of evidence. It's evidence of safety. So the example I always give, well, actually, let me go back. Sorry, I forgot I had asked this question. That thing that you mentioned earlier that stressed you out or is causing anxiety right now. And remember, I said, is there a possibility that things could go wrong? Now, I just want you to consider this. You don't have to answer in the chat. If you knew that whatever you were worried or anxious about could not cause you harm, would you be as anxious? And my guess is the answer is no. And this is why our brain, when we absolutely have certainty that we are going to be okay, we are not stressed and we're not anxious. It doesn't mean we don't think it's hard. It just means we can respond to that stressor from a regulated state. So, for example, if your child just got diagnosed with ADHD or with a regulation disorder or whatever it is, or if they just are struggling with friends, and you knew you had a crystal ball and you knew that maybe they were struggling now, but they could handle their feelings now, no threat there, and they'd have lots of friends later, you'd probably be able to approach it better. Then you could approach them and say, okay, let's deal with this issue. It's not that you're saying, oh, I'm happy that they're struggling, but you could handle it better. Our brain needs evidence of safety. And the example I always use is driving. If you remember, I happen to have a 15-year-old, almost 16-year-old who's learning to drive, although I use this example way before my kids were driving, but I see this now as she's learning to drive. But if you remember back, if you are someone who drives, if you remember back when you first learned to drive, when you learn to drive, you are in hyper vigilance. You're hyper vigilant. You're looking at everything. It's very scary. You're behind this 2, 3, 4 ton automobile. It is very, very scary. And if someone says, hey, driving's no big deal, you'll be fine, you don't believe them just because they said that. Your brain is still going to be hyper vigilant. I grew up in New Jersey. We had those traffic circles. And I remember people saying, oh, you'll be fine on the traffic circles if you know how to drive. That did not make me feel like I'd be fine. Once I went around those circles a few times, that's when we start to feel more confident. When we have evidence that we are safe, it is evidence that reduces stress and anxiety, not reassurance. So I'm going to tell you what will give your brain evidence in just a minute. But I also want you to think about this. I want you to think about when you were driving and whether, actually, I'm going to ask this yes no question. Do you these days have stress or anxiety when you're driving? Just say yes or no. When you get in the car, are you worried about having an accident? Yes or no? These days. Probably because we're in it so much. In Northern Virginia, probably, right? The way people drive. After my son was born. Interesting. Those of you who are saying yes, I want you to answer this question next. Do you think about the possibility of things going wrong? Are you very aware of the possibility of things going wrong? And I know based on your answers, because you said after my son was born, meaning something could happen to my son. Yes, the way people drive, meaning something could happen. Absolutely. My guess is there's a yes there. Yes, it's scary. Yes, yes. Okay. Those of you who said no, have you had evidence that you can go out there and it will be safe? So answer that yes or no question if you can. Those of you who said, I'm not worried, I'm someone who's not very worried anymore because I've had so much evidence. So yes, so that's a yes or no question. Do you recognize you've gone out there so many times that your brain is saying, oh, I'm going to be okay? Yeah. More often than not, I arrive to the destination safely. Exactly. But what's interesting, and I'm not trying to stress anyone out, I'm not trying to make anyone anxious because I'm actually the same way. I don't get too stressed driving anymore because I've just had so much experience that thank goodness nothing's happened. But statistically speaking, it's actually pretty dangerous to drive. Statistically speaking, that's one of the most likely ways that we will get hurt. Yet, when we've had a lot of evidence of safety, our brains say, oh, I'll be fine. And notice the people who said, yes, I'm anxious, are those brains who still focus on the threat. It really is all about if I have evidence of safety and I'm not thinking about the threat, I will not be anxious. It really does work that way. So, what I'm going to do for the rest of today is I'm going to give you 3 tools that help give your brain evidence that you will be okay. And tools that you have power over that will give your brain evidence of safety. So I really, one of the things, I'm an anxious person by nature, by the way, even though I'm not anxious about driving, I have pretty high anxiety that I manage on a daily basis. I'm not a non-anxious person. I just manage it. So I'm going to give you three tools that will help with this evidence of safety. And what I want you to do as I'm going through these is I do want you to test these tools. I'm going to ask you some questions. So I want you to have in mind something related to a child that is stressing you out right now. So maybe what you mentioned in the beginning, just something related to a child that is stressing you out right now, because I'm going to ask you a couple questions about that. Okay, first tool is to choose, and you'll notice that the verbs I use in these tools are very active verbs because you have the power to do all of these things that I'm mentioning. First, choose useful versus non-useful stories. So what I mean by that is we tell ourselves stories about what is going on in the world. This term actually comes from Brene Brown. I did not make up the word stories. She always says, notice what story you're telling yourself. Because we interpret situations. Humans are an interpreting species. And we tell ourselves, so if our child forgot homework, we say something to ourselves about that. Oh no, they forgot homework again. Or they forgot their homework again. We tell ourselves something about that. And we are not even aware of this most of the time. But our stories create a threat, or they don't. And what's interesting is that our stories are usually based on our own interpretation, but there is another story that will not create a threat. And here's the interesting thing about what I call non-useful stories. Non-useful stories will put you into fight or flight, and they don't help you. They're not useful, but they're not necessarily inaccurate. So if you see your child forgot their homework and you think, oh my gosh, they forgot their homework, it's going to affect their grade. That may be objectively true, but it creates a threat and it doesn't actually help you. Because if your child forgot their homework and you want to teach them executive functioning skills, now remember, I, for a living, teach parents to help their kids with this. I can tell you that if you walk up to your child and you're stressed and you want to teach them better ways to deal with this, your stress is going to shut them down. It's not going to help you meet your goals. If your goal is my child learns executive functioning strategies, or my child learns social skills, or whatever it is you want them to do better with, if you are in a panic state, you cannot teach them. It will not be effective. So non-useful stories are not necessarily inaccurate. They just aren't helping you. So here's some examples. I can't handle it if, or I've tried everything, nothing works, or this is a disaster. Those are non-useful stories. And maybe there's accuracy. In fact, I would say in about half of our non-useful stories, there is accuracy. But we can always, and I work with a lot of parents on this, change our story. They still have to be accurate, but they do not create a threat, and they're more likely to help you meet your goals. For example, changing I can't handle it if to I can handle it when. So I can't handle it if my children are screaming in the background and I'm so tired and I just can't handle it. You can say something like, I can handle it when my children are screaming in the background if I get noise canceling headphones, or if I sit in my car for 10 minutes before I walk into the house, or if I remind myself that my kids are just screaming because they're having fun, it doesn't seem as bad on my nervous system. We make plans, we reduce the threat. Or I have tried a lot. Here's what I'll do differently this time. Or we will be okay. Even if my child is struggling with social skills or academic skills, we will be okay because, or others have gotten through this before by whatever it is. These are what we call useful stories. In fact, I've heard them called before power stories because you always have the power to choose your story. There's no one that can force you to have a certain story. So I want you to think about this useful versus non-useful story. And I want you to go back. Remember, I just said, think of a situation about your child that is stressing you out. Think about what you're telling yourself. And I just want you to put in the chat one or two. Are most of your stories about this non-useful or useful? So what are you telling yourself? Just think about it. Like if you were describing this to a friend, are your stories non-useful or are they useful? Non-useful means they're not creating a threat. Useful means that non-useful are they are creating a threat. Useful are they are not creating a threat. So just think about that for a minute if you can. Are you telling yourself something that creates a threat? Yeah, and you can put the non-useful. I know there's a lot of numbers and threats, and you could just say non-useful or useful. The situation you put, and again, I know some people are sending me private messages, and that's great. I'm not always going to read out your private messages. Yeah. This is what we do is that we focus on the non-useful. And I can tell you, without exception, I've worked with thousands and thousands of parents over the years. It is possible to shift to a useful story. At the end, if someone wants to ask for help with this, I can absolutely help you. But just keep in mind, here's the basic tip for switching from a non-useful to a useful story. Notice where the threat is, and you can notice what's in your control to do. Notice how other people have solved this. Notice how other people have, gotten through this. These will all reduce the threat. All right. So next tool I'm going to give you. Please, 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 in your parenting, focus on what is in your control. Because what we do often is we focus on what is not in our control and our brain senses danger. So, one of the things I talk to parents a lot about too is setting limits. And a lot of parents will set the limit something like, you need to speak more nicely to your brother or sister, or you need to put your backpack in, you need to hang up your backpack after school. And then when our child doesn't do it, we feel out of control and we feel helpless. And then we go into the whole like, what's the best punishment I can use, or what's the best reward or consequence? And that often doesn't work because we're trying to focus on what is not in our control, which is our children's behavior. We will always sense danger and we will always be more stressed or anxious when we do that. So, unfortunately, I hate this about life. Remember, I'm an anxious person. I love control. I would love to control other people and I would love to control the future. That would make my perfect world. Unfortunately, we can't do any of that. And yet, that is what we spend most of our time doing. What is not in our control is getting our child to do something, making sure things happen. So, I need to make her be nicer to her brother. You can't make someone do that. How do I make sure that we'll all be okay? You can't do that. You can make it more likely. And what I actually talk about when I talk about setting limits is you can influence a child, but you can't make them. And ironically, the less you try to make a child do something, the more you influence them. The less you try to make someone do something, the more you influence them. So we need to focus on what is in our control. And when I have parents set limits in their household, getting their kids to stay in bed or put their backpacks away or be nice to them, whatever it is, we always, always come up with a plan. And I say, you cannot leave my session with me without knowing what is in your control. If your child doesn't do it, what you're going to do about that. You cannot focus on them changing. You have to focus on what's in your control. So, what is in our control? Our stories, our attitudes, our behavior, our action, all of that is in our control. So, for example, I can't make her be nicer to her sister, but I can work with her to figure out why she's not being nice. And this is actually how you influence someone. If someone is not nice to her, if a child is not nice to her brother, there's a reason. This is why I get such good success rates in my practice because we don't deal with the behavior, we deal with the cause of the behavior. So if a child isn't being nice, we figure out why. And a parent always has control over, asking questions. Or if a child won't answer questions, understanding why the child won't answer questions. This is where I come in. I help with all of this. Or I can't make sure we'll all be okay, but I can focus on making the present good. I talked about this a lot during COVID. There's nothing we can do to ensure we're going to be fine, but we can focus on what we can do right now. All of this is in our control. So what I want you to do is go back to that, what I asked you to think about that worries you about your child. And I want you to notice this. Are you focusing on changing your child or are you focusing on what's in your control? So you can put one or two. The thing that's stressing you out currently, before you heard my little spiel, were you focusing on changing your child, changing the future, or were you focusing on what's in your control? Yeah, I'm seeing the ones. When you focus on one, you are going to feel helpless. The best news in the world is that you can increase your influence. And then we're going to get to my last tip, which even if your influence doesn't work, it's still okay. You can increase your influence, but your influence increases, especially in parenting, when you stop trying to control a child. In fact, let me just ask that question, yes or no. Have you noticed that the more you try to control a child or someone else, the less likely they are to do the thing? Just have you noticed that? Yes, you've noticed that. No, you haven't. If you haven't, have you noticed the more you try to control your child, the less likely they are to do the thing? It's very, very common. That's what we do because we feel helpless and we don't want bad things to happen. And that's when most parents do come to me. They're saying, I've tried all these things and I notice that they're trying to control their child. Yeah. Okay. So now what we've talked about is just notice what you're telling yourself. That was tip number one. If your story is telling a threat, you're going to go into stress and anxiety. Two is stop focusing on out of your control, focus on what's in your control. And again, if anyone wants like, well, what does this look like to focus on what's in my control? Ask me at the end. I will absolutely tell you, but I also have examples coming up. All right, last tip I have for you before I get to those examples. Remember that things do not have to work out to be okay. This is something that we need to keep in mind, that we assume that everybody being happy and everybody, getting the best grades and all these things we want for our kids means that that's the only measure of success. And that is definitely not true. And as someone who focuses on resilience, I can tell you that things not working out are exactly what lead to resilience, to being able to handle the fact that life isn't always going to be okay, and to be able to maintain, mental health even when things don't go well. Underneath all of that, to maintain mental health when things don't go well, we have to remember things aren't supposed to always go well. Things don't have to go well for them to be okay. And what's interesting is if you think about even death in certain cultures is not a bad thing. They're not avoiding death like we do in often in Western cultures. Death can be celebrated. Death can be a good thing. So it's not like, oh, but someone might, do this, and it's objectively it may not be true. So we have to remember things don't always have to go the way we think objectively on paper for everything to be okay. Because when we focus on fixing everything, goes back to parenting, we're actually missing what kids really need. And I can tell you again, as an expert in resilience, we don't need things to be easy for our kids. In fact, we need things to be a little difficult. We just also have to teach them how to deal with the difficult. So let me show you what I mean by that. Our children do not need us to fix everything. Our children don't need us to feel responsible for making everything feel better or be better. Our children do not need life to be easy. They don't need to go through life without social struggles. They don't need to go through life without academic struggles. They don't need to go through life without executive functioning issues. That doesn't actually help them. In fact, I was an ADHD coach for many, many years. And the confidence I saw by the time I finished with most kids, the confidence I saw in them, they would have never had they not struggled the way they struggled with their executive functioning, issues. Because now they realized I can do hard things. I can struggle in school and I can feel good about myself because I know how to compensate for the fact that my brain doesn't work that way. They need challenges to feel better. So often we say, if her friends are mean to her, I need to talk to their parents, or I need to fix this, or I need to solve this, or I need to make sure she knows that everything will be fine. What we really need to think about is our kids don't need things to be perfect. They need our presence. They need our belief that we can handle whatever happens. And I would also add, I don't think I put it here, but I should, they need to know how to deal with discomfort. The people who are most confident in life, bar none, are not the people who necessarily know how to do everything. They're the people who know they can handle it when they can't do something. That is where confidence comes from. And that requires struggle. So we have to think, I can listen to what's happening. So if I can't fix something for my child, if her friends are being mean, she doesn't need me to fix it. I can listen to what's happening. I can empower her to find solutions. I can be here while her friends are being mean. Or I can, if I know something bad is going to happen, maybe we have to put our dog down and there's nothing we can do about that. I'm not going to make sure she knows everything's going to be fine, but I can be with her while we're sad. This is where our stress and anxiety reduces. When we realize, oh, you know what? Bad things don't equal threat. Bad things equal opportunity to practice resilient skills. So let me ask you, in that thing that is stressing you out, is your goal, number one, to make things better, or number two, to realize your child can handle it if it's not? So you could put a one or a two, that thing that's stressing you out. Are you focused on making sure that they are, those of you who are saying two, that's exactly what you want. That's going to decrease your stress. When you know that is always in your control, that can decrease your stress. Focus on that story. Okay, Gina, that's a question. Let me answer that at the end, okay? So Gina, definitely I want to answer that. I just don't want to get off track. And I know some people have to leave. So definitely ask me that towards the end, because now you've heard everything and I will answer it. Okay, just in case there are comments that push that up, that's the only reason I say ask that later. Otherwise, I'll try to find it again. Okay, so let me give you some examples. putting all of these tools together so you can see what this looks like practically speaking. Let's say your child is struggling because they're not paying attention in class. Again, you may have a child with executive functioning issues. You could insert really any executive functioning issue. They're losing their homework. They're not whatever. They're not keeping their room clean. Whatever it is that they're struggling with. Your child isn't paying attention. So notice your story. Instead of if he doesn't pay attention, he'll fall behind. That is going to put you in threat mode, stress, anxiety. Think we'll be okay when we figure out what makes it hard for him to pay attention. Now, as an expert in executive functioning strategies, I can tell you once you know why a child isn't paying attention, you can teach them a strategy to compensate, or you can help them still retain the material even if they can't pay attention in class. There's always a solution. Next, what you're focusing on. If you are focusing on, I need to get him to focus more, remember, that's not in your control. You cannot get a child to focus more. What you can say is, I will learn why kids have trouble focusing and what some of the solutions are. And I can tell you, as someone who's worked with kids who have trouble focusing and someone who's coached parents to help their children, the more you say, you have to try this strategy. Why aren't you trying the strategy? Did you try that strategy? They are not going to use the strategy. You cannot try to force them to do it. One of the tips I give parents is if your child is having trouble with executive functioning, we have to get in their world before we can become influential. We can't try to force them into our world. All right. Lastly, if they're not paying attention, we don't need things to work out. We don't want to think he needs to be able to pay attention all day, or he'll never get a job, or he'll never be able to get into a good. We don't want to think that because that's going to stress us out. Whoops. If he struggles to pay attention, we'll work as a team to find ways to support him. So even if no strategy works, we'll still figure this out. We have the power to determine what stresses us out or not. We have the power in our mind. So this isn't preventing those thoughts from creeping in. This is, and I can tell you as someone with anxiety, my anxious thoughts are going to come in. They're going to come in. I just now notice them and I say, that's my anxiety trying to protect me. I am choosing to believe something different. That's where we get power back. All right, last example. Let's say your child has anxiety. I have two of those kids, both of my kids, not apple doesn't fall far. Both my husband and I have anxiety. So not surprisingly, our children do too. So our story about the fact, like I've had anxiety my whole life. So it would be very easy for me to think my anxiety affected me. It'll affect my child too. It'll affect both of my kids too. Be very easy. And in fact, I probably did when they were young initially think that. It doesn't help me to think that though. That will make me more anxious. It will make me more controlling. And we can say, this will be okay because I see anxiety differently than my parents did. My parents had no idea I was an anxious, sensitive person when I was growing up. The term sensitive and I'm a highly sensitive person didn't exist. They had no idea. So they didn't know what to teach me. I know what to teach my kids. And I can tell you, as having two teenage daughters, they are way more confident at their age than I ever was. And they are both pretty anxious kids in different ways. So we are really noticing our stories and empowering ourselves not to stay in threat mode. Notice what you're focusing on. So instead of, I need to make sure she learns the tools she needs, thinking, I can let her know that she's not alone. This is way more influential than saying you have to learn these skills. And lastly, things do not have to work out. So instead of thinking, if she doesn't get rid of this anxiety, she'll feel helpless the rest of her life, I can think, she can learn to live with anxiety. Many people do. I learned to live with it probably starting in my mid-30s, and I'm in my late 40s now. I'm a very successful human, and I just manage my anxiety. And so instead of thinking, oh my goodness, but for the first 35 years of my life, I was miserable, I'm not going to think that. I'm going to think she can learn to live with it, and I could teach her younger. Reducing the threat, reducing the threat, reducing the threat. That's what it's all about. All right, so I'm going to just review these strategies to reduce the threat. And then I'm going to open it up to questions. We have plenty of time for questions. Yeah, we have about 45 minutes for questions. So remember, if you want to reduce stress or anxiety, the basic concept is if you're focusing on the threat, you're making it worse. The threat thought may come into your brain, notice it, and you have the power. And sometimes I tell parents, release it. Like, don't just like try to make it go away. That doesn't work either. So really good metaphor for this. Actually, let me tell you very quickly before I review these. The way you want to think about thoughts is I heard this from someone named Brooke Castillo. She teaches it this way: thoughts or feelings. If you have a thought or a feeling, it's like a beach ball on water. If you try to push the beach ball down into water, it's just going to pop right back up. So we're not trying to push it down. We're actually letting it go and it will slowly drift away. Very often, it will slowly drift away. So I'm not saying you want to push it down. Often, what I do, parents, is I say, get all of your anxious thoughts out. Tell me your entire story. Get it all out, because when you get it all out, it makes room for you to be able to see it differently. So I'm not saying in that moment, just switch. You might have to vent a little bit. But when you're ready to switch, how do I do that? How do I switch? This is how. You shift from the threat story to the non-threat story, the useful story, the non-useful story to the useful story. You focus on what's in your control. So the question you ask yourself is, what is in my control in this situation? What is anything I can do about it? And then you remind yourself things don't always have to work out. So if something happens, what possibly could benefit, how could they benefit from this? Or why will we still be okay? Once you've reduced the negativity, these are your strategies for switching. These are just 3 strategies for switching your thoughts. Okay, so what I'm going to do is open to questions, and I just have the screen up. I'll leave it up for a few more moments, and then I just want you to see I do have some resources for you. So first, I have, if you want tips of mine, and these are all mostly parenting tips, although it's also parent stress tips, you can just send the word tips to this email address, info@rachel-bailey.com. You don't have to put anything in the email, just the word tips. That's my team's email address, and they will add you to my emails, where I do a lot of especially if you have a child who's sensitive, anxious, or strong-willed, a lot of strategies and sort of help you see what's going on for your child. I also have a podcast, a Facebook group. They're both Your Parenting Long Game. And then if you know you want more direct support, you have a child with anxiety, you have anxiety, you can send support also to that email address. I do not see kids or teens, though, just so you know. What I do is I work with parents. So either, if your child needs support, you can either take them, or what I do is I help you support your child. All right, so that is what I have. I'm going to go back and answer the questions that came up. And then also feel free to put more questions in the chat if you have them. Okay, so the one I had, okay, there were no more comments, so I will just answer that one from Gina. What if it's not about something happening to your kid, but your kid not cooperating or listening, which is causing you stress, which in turn would not be okay for us parents? Okay, so when a child is not cooperating or listening, that is another area of expertise of mine. So I basically work on behaviors, moods, and attitudes. When a child is not cooperating or listening, let's be real, it affects you. And that's probably why you're trying to get them to change. But here's the thing. I know how to get kids to change, and it is not by trying to get them to change. It is by understanding what's under their behavior. So if they're not listening, there are really 3 reasons they don't listen. One is they don't have the executive functioning skills to listen. So let's say, for example, you ask your child to get off of their screens and come to the dinner table. There are multiple executive functioning strategies needed for that. If they're not listening, maybe they're having trouble disengaging their brain from what they're doing, or maybe they're having trouble, knowing how to do something uncomfortable on the other side and transitioning. There are multiple executive functioning skills. So that's one reason kids don't listen. Another reason kids don't listen is because they have what I call yuck. So when they feel some sort of emotion, it's going to actually override their skills. So once we figure out what's the yuck and what are the skills, kids listen. And guess what? Both of those things are in your control. Whether you teach them skills, figure out what's going on and teach them skills, whether you address that yuck, that's all in your control. But trying to get them to listen is not the way to get them to listen. Now, the fact that it affects you, which it does affect us, one of the things I say to parents all the time is, your child is going to start to listen. They are. It's going to take some time, though. And so in the meantime, you want to think about how it affects you. And you want to say, how can I give myself what I need until they change? Because if your only way that you're going to feel better is if they change, you're giving all of your power away. So what you want to do is say, what can I do that's in my control until they change so that this affects me less? What can I change? What can I ask for? What do I need in the meantime? Because yes, it does affect us. And when it affects us, we go into fight or flight. So long story short, to give you the 30,000-foot view, in order for them to listen, we want to figure out why they're not listening. Again, once you figure that out, they'll listen. And you want to say, in the meantime, because it affects me, and it really does, what can I do about that? What's in my control to do about that, rather than try to make them change? Okay. So yuck, someone just asked, yuck is a blanket term I use to describe any type of discomfort. So yuck might be that they are hungry or tired or frustrated that you asked them to turn off their TV and they didn't, they were in the middle of something. It could be any type of discomfort, feeling disrespected, feeling out of control, feeling, yeah, strong-willed. Oh, so yeah, I worked with strong-willed kids. Yeah, exactly. But yuck is just an emotional state of a threat where we go into fight or flight. And yuck prevents us from using skills. So that's what yuck is. Okay. So let me um, go. And please, the questions are, I think, my favorite part of all of this because I don't always know exactly what to put in the presentation because I don't know who's here. Please ask your questions. You'll get so much more information if you ask me your questions. Okay, so next one I see. My child is anxious about a particular situation, and I point out that she was okay after the situation passes. That evidence doesn't register as she'll be okay next time. Is there something else I can help her see or understand? Yes, what you're doing is you're trying to get her to see, you're trying to control her. So here's what I would do. I'm going to be teaching you new techniques I hadn't yet because you asked that question. There's something that's really helpful for anxious kids called a drop and leave. So, one of the things that you can do after the situation is say um, something like, I noticed that went better. Was there something you did differently? And then literally leave. Because an anxious brain and a sensitive brain, and I have one of those, needs time to process. And if someone who's anxious or sensitive thinks you're trying to convince them, they will focus more on the danger and putting their stake in the ground than on what you're saying. With anxious, sensitive kids, we have to use a drop and leave. If you're like, hey, that went better, didn't it? The anxious brain is going to go to, yeah, that one time went better, but think about all the 10 times that didn't go better. So you cannot just get them to see your perspective. That's you trying to force them to see your perspective. You're going to do some drop and leaves. The other thing you can do with an anxious child who has some success is you can have them, this actually embeds in their brains a little bit better. You can have them coach other people. They do better coaching other people than being coached. So let's say you can say, hey, my friend was also in that situation that you were just in, that you handled well. Do you have any advice I could give my friend to tell their child? Because that takes away the danger of the situation and it helps them focus on what they did well. So, again, two really important strategies for sensitive, anxious kids: a drop and leave, because they need time to process, and deferring to them as an expert. That makes the situation safer so they can actually encode the fact that they do know in part what to do or what went differently. So I hope that helps. But yeah, when we say, hey, you just did that great, immediately their brain is going to go to, yeah, that time I was fine, but all the other times I wasn't. That's why it's not sinking in. Just that we anxious brains are really, really good at going to danger. So, and they can't handle the evidence that's coming from us. They need to see the evidence for themselves, and those two strategies will help them see it for themselves. Okay. Okay, so next question. What if a child is listening and cooperating, but makes the same mistakes again and again? Like he's willing to fix it when the parents address the problem, but then he forgets it the next days and it happens again. Okay, so there are two reasons a child would forget. One is literally a memory issue where they genuinely don't remember in that moment and they just probably need some sort of external reminder. It doesn't have to be you, it could be a sign, it could be an alarm, it could be structure, like a routine is a really good external reminder. So it could be a memory issue or it could be a yuck issue. So what happens often is, let's say, I'll give an example. Let's say a child doesn't stand up to their peers and you have them practice, you do role plays and you say, if someone is being mean to you, stand up for yourself. And they do it in the role plays and they do it and they do it. But then they get in that situation and they don't do it. It looks like they forgot. It's because their emotion is bigger than their skill. So remember, yuck will trump skills. So if they're forgetting, it could also be there's something emotional going on. So again, a memory issue, you just give an external cue. An emotional issue, then you need to process the emotion of that situation. So that's what you want to think about. Is it a memory or is it an emotion? And that's what you want to address. Okay, next one. Hopefully that helps. Okay, I believe I overthink or overanalyze situations. Yes, many people do that. So even when I lean towards telling myself useful stories, I still feel the stress or anxiety in my body. Are there other suggestions for those who are naturally anxious? So that's me too. That is me too. What is happening is the same thing I was mentioning earlier is that your brain is probably looking for all the evidence that the non useful story is true. So, a couple things to think about. I find that when we are in anxiety and we can't fight it, we actually need to go back a little bit into what causes those anxious feelings to come up. Some of this, I have to be honest, as a former therapist, I will say that, and I'm not a therapist anymore. We have to go into there may be something from our past that has not been processed, and our brain literally doesn't want us to let it go. Our brain literally does not want us to let it go. So that's one important thing to think about. Is there something in the past that really needs to be revisited? It's not always a trauma. It could just be something where we felt out of control and our brain wants us to really gain that feeling of control back. The other thing you can also do is think about things like body work, where you're doing meditation. And I'm not a huge meditator, so I'm not like being hypocritical here. I know it's hard, but meditation will also help with this because what happens in an anxious brain and an overthinker is we can't stay in the present and we keep going to the future. So meditation helps with being able to slow down and stay present instead of always going to the future. And then there's also something that I'll be honest, I've done in the past, which is similar to body work, which is emotional freedom techniques, which are, you may have heard of this as tapping. And what it does is when you start to go to the anxious state, it actually allows you to process those feelings. So lots of different ways you can think about this. You can just simply, if using useful stories helps, just you can just stay there. For those who are more naturally anxious, we might have to go deeper into what has happened. We might have to do some body work. We might have to help our nervous system calm down in other ways and stay more present. So those are other ways besides the cognitive strategies that I gave you that can help with anxiety. Okay, and I will tell you, I've done multiple things that have helped me get to where I am. Okay. I know everything will be okay. Why am I still worried? Very similar to what I was just saying. We have to respect that anxiety can be stored in our body. So you may know intellectually that you're going to be okay. There's something in your body that may not believe that. Because when we really are stuck in it, there's either something chemically going on and we literally can't unstuck ourselves from it, or there's something in our body going on. And unfortunately, our aware thoughts are only a very small part of what's happening in our brain. So these strategies, again, very surface because it's a pretty general audience. When I give a little deeper talks about anxiety, we go a little deeper than these surface strategies. So if you do need to go deeper, there's probably maybe something going on in your body that you need to address. And by the way, those of you who are in therapy, you might, and maybe some of you have had trauma, probably heard of something called EMDR, which is where it actually helps unlock some of the stuff that's in your body. And it's a very, very effective therapy. So it's the same thing. It's sort of releasing some of the stuff that's in our body. So if you know that everything is going to be okay, that's just at your awareness level. There may be something still stuck inside. That's the body work. That's the EMDR, the therapy, things like that. Okay. So if anyone has any, I don't think there are any questions about these. Yeah. Okay. Glad it makes sense. I just want to make sure no one was asking follow-up questions. What are your tips with attachment issues? I think that's what it is with my son. He is my boy and now is a teen who wants to date, and I'm having trouble accepting the fact that he is growing and no longer a small child. Okay, so it sounds like these are more your attachment to him than his attachment to you. And that makes so much sense because there's something about him being a boy that represents something to you that when he is no longer a boy, that is taken away. That's the threat that is in your mind. The threat is if he's no longer a boy, something bad will happen. And it may just be, when I say something bad, it may just be, it will be uncomfortable. The brain often, and I try, my whole career is trying to spend changing this, but our brains believe discomfort is bad. So maybe just, this is uncomfortable. He doesn't want me as much. I'll be replaced by another, special someone in his life. Those are the things you want to try to unlock some of the stories that are in your awareness and understand how they make you uncomfortable, understand how they create some sort of threat for the future. This is what's going on for you. And once you start to understand that, you can start to address them. You can start to address these stories, address what's in your control. So, for example, if your thought is he's going to replace me, what's in your control is even if he has someone else in his life, or eventually in the future, I can still have a good relationship with him. Just as an example, I have two older brothers. They are both in their 50s. They're both both married, very happy marriages, both extremely close with my mom. So it's like we look sort of for the evidence that things will be okay, that you don't have to have that same relationship. That was just a small example. So there's something about that in there that is showing your brain that there's a threat or danger. Hope that helps. All right. Thanks for the drop and leave. The situation is related to bodily function. She's anxious about, yeah, having to use the bathroom when she leaves the house. And each time she goes somewhere, she either didn't have to use the bathroom or she did and nothing was wrong. Yeah, exactly. So she still has a threat over the bathroom, though. There's still something about the bathroom that is worrisome to her. So it's that probably isn't gone yet. So she knows intellectually, but her body isn't sure yet. Yep, absolutely. Okay. All right, so just scrolling down. Okay, I guess I'm trying to control my son by getting him to take off his shoes in the mudroom, hang his coat up. Instead, I get shoes and coats throughout the house. To me, it seems simple, but there's no getting him to do it. One of his chores is taking out recycle and trash, but I always have to remind him and point it out when it's needed. Recycle could be completely overflowing, and there's no instinct telling him that it needs to be emptied. Okay, yeah. You are very common. You are representative of the families that come to me. My child doesn't see it; they're not doing it. I've reminded them a million times. Okay, so again, when a child isn't listening, first of all, I can tell you, yes, you were trying to control him too much. Not that you're being controlling, but you're focusing on how do I get him to versus why isn't he doing it in the first place. That shift will change everything. So why isn't he doing it in the first place? I'm going to tell you a couple of things. Number one, your agenda doesn't matter to him. It doesn't. So yeah, he may see that it's overflowing. It doesn't matter. It's not registering for him as something that needs to be taken care of. So your agenda matters to you. It doesn't matter to him. And for I don't know how old your son is, but for someone that age, they're I would say it's 12. Perfect. I was going to say if he's adolescent at all, it's a very self-centered time. Their brain's going through a lot of changes. Their body's going through a lot of changes. So it makes sense that your agenda doesn't matter to him. So a couple of things that we do when we set limits, this is a whole other topic. But when we set limits, there are two things that have to happen at the same time. If either one is not present, actually there are three things, but I'll tell you two and then two and a half. If one of these things is missing, it's not going to go well. One is that there is firmness in how you set it up, meaning I wouldn't wait until the trash is overflowing. It would be the trash needs to go out. I'm making this up Thursday nights at 8. There has to be a firm structure. And literally, for the first little while, he needs to know that that has to happen and nothing else will happen. There has to be some firmness because kids have what I call an avoider brain. And in fact, adults have an avoider brain too. And we have to teach their avoider brain that there is no way around it. And often in the beginning, when a lot of kids ignore us, we have to set the structure of limits to prove to them and their avoider brain that there is no way around it. So I have parents set it up a certain way. I just kind of gave you an example. It has to be really firm, no way around it. And I would say what I hear from parents, I have thousands of emails from parents, maybe not thousands, but probably 30, 40, 50 emails from parents who say to me, Rachel, when I was consistent and I was firm, even that in itself made a difference. Don't leave it up to him because he's always going to avoid it. It's the trash goes out at this time. Okay, that's the first thing. Firm limits. When you're delivering these limits, by the way, you have to be confident and you have to be connected. You can't be, too bad. I don't really care. You have to say, yeah, I know you don't want to, and it's time, and we're going to wait. So firm. The other piece that has to happen at the same time is we have to understand what executive functioning skills are needed. Not does he have the capacity to take out the trash? Yes, at 12 he does, but does he have the executive functioning skills? Those include things like how do I do uncomfortable things? How do I disengage from what I was doing, stopping to go take out the trash? How do I, if my brain is telling me I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, how do I talk back to my brain that says that I don't want to do this? He needs certain skills that are not mature in a 12-year-old, and he needs help with that. And one of the ways we introduce this to our kids, once we've been really firm, is we say, okay, now you see the trash has to go out. There's no way around it. Do you want to make this situation less bad? That's actually a drop and leave. Do you want to make this situation less bad? And eventually, because I was a therapist for very, very resistant kids, usually they say, no, I don't care, I don't care, I don't care. Eventually they say yes, and that's when we start to teach them strategies. So children listen when really two, and I'll tell you the half is in place. First, non-negotiable. The limit has to be very firm, very predictable. It cannot be where you notice the trash is full and you say, hey, I know you're in the middle of something, but the trash is full. Come do. That's not predictable and that is not going to go well. It has to be predictable. They have to know ahead of time when they're going to do it. It has to be really firm. They have to have the executive functioning skills. If one of those things is missing, they are not going to do the task. Now, the half piece I was talking about is your influence. Often our energy just in itself will actually put them into yuck so they don't listen to us. So our influence matters too. That's sort of the half. I don't want to get too far into that because I already made this a very long answer. But just remember, if you are not firm and predictable, and if your child doesn't have the skills, they're not going to listen. So when we just remind them, that doesn't do it. And no, he doesn't care. These are the two things. It's not that they'll only do what they care about. They're going to do because they know there's no loophole and they have the skills to do it. So I hope that helps. And I hope it helps you see why he wasn't doing it to begin with. Okay. Um, so Y is 2 years old, not verbal yet. Um, he will not eat unless he is forced. He asks to be pressed for it. And then his four and twins eat, but he doesn't eat. Okay. What I will say is for a 2 year old who's not eating unless forced, I would just understand, especially a nonverbal. I think that's going to be out of my realm of expertise. I'm not sure. I can deal with the anxiety over it, but there may be something different there. I would say I don't want to speak to a child who's nonverbal and needs to be forced to eat. That's kind of out of my. I worked with eating disorders in adolescence. I know enough to know that some eating issues are out of my realm of expertise, and I would say that that's probably not something I want to comment on. Um, so unfortunately, that's not one I'm going to be able to answer. I would talk to someone who really understands sort of what's going on because I don't want to force a nonverbal child who doesn't really understand what's going on how to feed, and I'd need to know more detail, and I'm not even sure again that I'm the right person for that if I'm being honest. And I will always be honest about where my expertise ends. Okay, next one, unfortunately, moving on. What about kids who respond with yelling? Okay, kids who respond with yelling definitely isn't my expertise. So, kids who respond with yelling, it's basically they have yuck and they don't have good regulation skills. So, yelling is a sign that someone is having some sort of emotional state. And it doesn't even have to be emotional, by the way. Yuck could also be biological. For example, let's say a child is bored and you say, go play with this toy. And they say, I don't want to play with that toy. A lot of parents will say to me, but Rachel, they weren't in yuck and they still yelled. That's still yuck. It's just more physiological yuck because boredom is actually a physiological yuck. So there's some sort of yuck and they don't have regulation skills. So when we teach kids how to tolerate discomfort and regulate, the yelling stops, but not until then. So that's why I always stress what executive functioning skills do they have? Because if they don't have the skills to tolerate discomfort, in fact, I'll ask this question to that parent. Has your child demonstrated that they have mastered regulation skills? If you're still listening to me live, have they demonstrated that they've mastered regulation skills? Yes or no? Yeah, so there you go. It's just that's a regulation skill issue. And once we teach them regulation skills, and I say it like it's so easy, teaching regulation skills, that's a big topic. That's another topic I've talked about. Teaching regulation skills is not easy, but there's a step-by-step process. And once they have the regulation skills, that's when the yelling stops, but not until then. So that's what I have to go to. Okay, it might take a few months for them to learn to regulate if you follow a step-by-step process. What do you do in the meantime? What are you going to do? Yeah, it's hard when it triggers you to get upset too. So again, this is my world. This is what I work with all the time. Here's what I want you to do. You're getting upset because you see it as a threat because you're saying, oh my gosh, yelling, it's so horrible. That's not okay. It's not acceptable. I don't disagree with you. That's all accurate, but it's not useful. So what you want to say is he's yelling because he hasn't mastered regulation skills. We are working on these regulation skills. And here's the kicker. If he can't regulate, if I'm asking him to regulate when things are not going his way, I have to regulate when things are not going my way. So just notice the irony, and we all do this. I'm definitely not calling you out. We all are, including me, we are all in this boat. We ask them to regulate before we can regulate. and we are adults and we have a fully formed prefrontal cortex. Yeah. So you just want to think, I have to work on my regulation because it's going to take him a little while to learn that. So I work on mine. I work on changing my story. One of the best things you can do is when he yells, say, ah, there it is. I knew he was going to do that. He hasn't mastered the skills yet because all that reduces the threat. That's the basis of regulation. Hope that helps. All right. Other questions? So would you walk away or call them out for it or just model it? Great question. What I would do when I set up limits, so this is a limit that, yelling is not allowed in our house, but you can't say to him, you can't yell. You can say, if you yell, I will walk away. That's in your control. Remember, I said, don't control him. You walk away. I will walk away and then be consistent with that and continue to walk away. Now, that's only half of the limit setting. Does he know how to regulate? No. So you also have to work on skills. So you walking away is not enough. But if you say you have to stop yelling and he doesn't, now all of a sudden you're out of control. You feel out of control. You feel powerless. You feel helpless. So you're going to say, this is what I'm going to do if you yell. And then you say, eventually you start to teach those regulation skills. And I talk a lot about how do we motivate kids to use skills, but you teach those regulation skills. When both are in place, he knows that you will not engage with it and he has the skills. That's when that's going to stop. And you can certainly model it. You can call them out on it too, but calling them out isn't going to do anything except probably create more yuck. Because think about this. If you were really frustrated and you yelled at someone and they said to you, you're yelling, you need to stop yelling, that's not really going to get you to stop yelling. Okay, hope that helps. So disrespect is a big piece of what I work with. We can't make kids stop being disrespectful. We can set limits, decide what we're going to do, and then we teach them regulation strategies. Good, good, good. All right. Any other questions about behaviors, moods, attitudes? Okay. I have a 6-year-old daughter who's really friendly with anyone and everyone, sometimes overshares information. Even after making her understand in so many ways, she seems not to understand when to draw the line with a third person. That is stressful. Yeah. So again, this objectively could be a stressful situation. I don't want to disagree with you. I just want you to think about it differently. This is also a skills-based issue. When you realize that a lot of what's beneath our kids' negative behavior is a skills-based issue that they just haven't learned the skill, it can reduce the stress because you can always teach skills. Always teach skills. And when we objectively say, this is a stressful situation, there's nothing I can do, I can try everything, go back and rewind. I'm going to actually stop sharing. Go back and rewind to the presentation where we say, yes, it's stressful. Objectively, someone could say that, but we could also say, we're teaching them strategies. So let's talk about someone who is oversharing information. Again, a couple of reasons they may be oversharing is that they genuinely don't know. And when kids genuinely don't know, we create rule books for them. We create social skills books for them. And we practice it just like we would practice the multiplication table, the addition table. If a child genuinely does not know, then we have to teach them what the rules are. It could also be, though, over excitement at being around other people. So it's possible that she knows the rules, but she's so excited that she can't remember or use the rules because excitement will make it hard to control our impulses. So if that's the case, we need to teach her how to calm her body when she's overexcited. How do we notice that your body is excited? How do you calm it down? Those are often some sensory body strategies so that you can use that in the moment. And then if you're going into a social situation, you can remind her. You can say, hey, remember, your body's going to feel those ants in your pants. When that happens, give yourself, and I'm making this up, give yourself 10 deep squeezes and then remind yourself what you can say in this situation. So again, what you're doing is building those skills. And I mentioned 2 types of skills that she might need, either the I don't know the rules or I need to calm my body down. We teach that. When we teach kids how to be successful, they are successful. But most of us feel stressed because we're not seeing it as a skills-based issue, and then we feel helpless. And remember, helplessness will lead to stress and anxiety. All right. Hopefully that helps. So we moved locally in January. Our 9-year-old son is having some difficulty adjusting to the new school, making new friends, saying no one talks to me. He's also under academic pressure also because he's in advanced classes. We've reached out to his counselor and his pediatrician, set up play dates with old friends, done activities on the weekends that he likes. We also pray together as well at night and talk with him frequently, and talk with his something frequently. Okay. So yeah, I think that you're setting up a lot of foundation for a calmer nervous system. I love that, where you're talking to people and you are praying together. That's a really calm, that's a good foundation. My suggestion, if you, because there wasn't really a question here, I'm assuming you want to know sort of how you can help with this. There's a strategy I have not taught yet. Another one I taught, dropping leaves, and but there's another strategy that I haven't mentioned yet called the 4 Ps. And the 4 Ps help with specific situations, like if he wants to walk up to a friend, if he wants to be sort of do something different in a situation, but he has anxiety. And these 4 Ps, by the way, will also help if you have a child who like won't go to the dentist. Any like clear situation, these 4 Ps will help with. The 4 Ps I will tell you are predictability, power, plan, and practice. So, predictability. Let's say he wants to walk up to someone at school to make friends, but he's too nervous. Predictability is you're going to have him think of everything about the situation that he knows. Who's the child? What room are you going to be in? When are you going to do this? Because the more predictability, the less the brain is anxious. Predictability reduces uncertainty, it reduces anxiety. The next is power. So, what is in your power in that situation? Do you want to walk up to the child when they're alone or when they're with someone else? That's in your control to decide. Do you want to wait until they're not talking to walk up to them? Or do you want to try to insert yourself in a conversation? Give them choices and decisions that are in their power. Power reduces anxiety. The next is plan. This is a plan for what if that child, you walk up to them and they don't talk back to you? What will you do? So the plan is always about what will you do when you're uncomfortable? And then lastly is practice. And practice is where we have them practice this plan outside of the moment. And what I really suggest if you're practicing a plan with a child is that instead of doing just traditional role plays, you have a role play where you are pretending to be your child and they are critiquing you. So instead of saying, let's do the role play, you pretend to be you, I'll pretend to be the boy, you switch roles. You let them be the person they're talking about, they're walking up to, and you pretend to be them. Not only does that give them a little bit more power because they're playing the role of the other person, but it also allows them to critique you and think about situations more clearly than when they feel like they're just doing simple role plays. So again, lots to unpack in that one probably, but the 4 Ps, any of those 4 Ps reduce anxiety. Predictability, power, plans, and practice all reduce anxiety. So I hope that helps. All right. My 15-year-old daughter has social anxiety. She often refuses to get out of the car when we go to places with even small crowds of people. We plan to go out, but then she refuses to get out of the car when she sees people at the event. How do I manage this? So very similar. The 4 Ps are going to help there as well. When you have a teenager, remember, I have teenagers are my area of expertise because that's what I really focus on as a therapist. So teenagers, you're not going to do like role plays that are like young and silly, but what you do with a 15-year-old, first of all, is you take them very seriously. You do not tell them why they're wrong. You don't say, but people are going to like you. In fact, you don't do this to any child, but you really don't want to do this to a teenager. You don't want to tell them that their anxiety is wrong, even though that's our instinct, because remember in the very beginning, I said they won't respond to logic. You ask them what situation bothers them, what bothers them about it, and then say, thank you for telling me. Then you say, do you want to do something about this? You give them the power to say yes or no. If you approach an anxious person before they're ready for advice, remember what I said happens? They go to all the reasons you're wrong. If they're still in yuck in this place of anxiety and you're giving them solutions, they are focusing on why every single one of your solutions won't work. You have to approach them and say, do you want a solution to this? If they say yes, you want to say, and the answer to this is probably going to be no, but have you thought of anything yet? They're probably going to say no, because if they had thought of anything, they would have used it. Then you're going to say, can I give you a suggestion? Again, let them say yes, because that makes their brain more open to solutions. When they say yes, if they say no, then you have to come back at another time, to be honest, because it wasn't going to work anyway. If they say yes, you say, okay, I'm going to come up with a couple of ideas, but I want you to tell me why they won't work. And then we're going to think about what's more realistic. So again, what I'm saying to you as a parent is Tell your child solutions and say to them, you can tell me why they won't work. You can say, you as a parent can say, I haven't been 15 in a really long time. You can tell me why this is stupid for a 15-year-old. What that actually does is it shows their brain that you're not just trying to shove your advice down their throat, and it helps them feel safer. Allow them to be an expert. That's another theme I've talked about a lot today. Allow your child to be an expert. That actually reduces anxiety. Allow them to be an expert. And when they can say, no, that's stupid, that you can say, okay, help me. I'm not 15. What would make it more likely? What would make it the situation less bad? Last thing I'm going to say to wrap this up, and everyone I hope can hear this. A lot of kids with anxiety think that there's going to be that nothing works because nothing works to make something feel easy in the moment. And that's true. Nothing works to make something feel easy in the moment. So another thing that I hadn't mentioned explicitly but I will mention now is that when we're working with kids with anxiety, we aren't saying do this and you'll feel better. We're saying do this because it might make it slightly less bad. This less bad phrase is very important because an anxious brain, if they expect it to feel good, then they're going to say it didn't work. If they expect it to feel less bad, they're more readily able to experience, yes, that made it a little less bad. Didn't make it feel good, but it made it a little less bad. All right, so it was a long answer, had lots of different strategies in there, but hopefully that was helpful. Remember, defer to your child as an expert, ask for their permission, talk about making it less bad instead of this will make you feel better and it will be awesome, because that's not true. All right. All right, I don't see any more.
Yeah,
So I think
I
I'm gonna hand
think
it
you
back.
did get all the questions,
Good.
Rachel. We really do want to appreciate you being here. This is a fantastic webinar and presentation. And we want to remind the participants that you will get all the slides, which have your contact information there, right? So that they can direct any further questions and try to get more support. Yes,
Absolutely.
and to answer that, the recording will be sent out. We'll work on the dubbing and the presentations, and everyone as registered participants will get a copy of it that will have all the information. But we want to thank all of you for being here today. We know that it was a 2 hour delay, so for those who made it, we're really happy that you were here. And we will continue to work with Rachel, and we'll let you know when she's coming back.
Thank you. Bye bye.